Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Unlocking Cloud Cost Efficiency with Azure, Google, and FinOps. My name is Marie Brown, and I'm Director of Product Marketing at Ternary. I've been in the FinOps and cost management space for just about 8 years now. And yeah, there's been a lot of evolution in this space, and we're really excited to talk with you today about some of the latest trends we're seeing. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Hayden. Hayden, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Hayden Singh. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at Ternary. I've been in the FinOps space for going on about 7, almost 8 years now. And I'll be walking through and showing you the platform as we go through it today. So excited to have you
Yeah,
here.
just about the same amount of time as I am. So yeah, we've both seen the evolution of the tooling landscape as well as some of the more recent trends and expansions of FinOps scopes and new technologies in the market. So really excited for today's session. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A window. We will monitor the chat throughout the session, but we will take all the questions at the end. So feel free to add those throughout. I'm going to kick things off with some level setting of why we're just focusing on Azure and Google today in this session before I hand things over to Hayden for the demonstration, and then we'll wrap up with a few slides. So to start, no surprise to many of the folks on the call here, but AWS is most often regarded as the leading cloud provider in the market, and most often this is based on the market share. Currently, AWS holds about 30% of the market share for cloud providers in the space, with Microsoft and Google Cloud trailing behind, respectively. Now, what we've encountered over the years is that there are a vast majority of organizations that have AWS as their primary cloud, namely because perhaps AWS was one of the first clouds to market and came out with a lot of different services and pricing mechanisms and levers that organizations could take advantage of. But in recent years, Microsoft and Google have, quickly accelerated some of their market share. We also see plenty of organizations that choose Microsoft and Google Cloud as their primary clouds as well. And this can be for specific reasons such as negotiating power, avoiding vendor lock-in, taking a multi-cloud approach, or perhaps there are some industry nuances here. And a great example of that is with retail organizations. Some retail organizations who compete with Amazon in their primary business segment may choose to use Azure and Google Cloud for that reason. But what's really interesting is if you look at the year-over-year growth, the order of these cloud providers flips. So in the most recent earnings report published by CRN, you'll note that Google Cloud's recent growth is 30%, closely followed by Microsoft and Amazon, who are neck and neck, so to speak. And why this is interesting, because we've found that a lot of organizations who do have Azure, Google as a secondary or third cloud in their ecosystem often just focus on cost efficiency and usage efficiency when it comes to their AWS environment, because perhaps that is where they're spending the most money. And in other cases, it may just be that they're observing Google and Microsoft, perhaps considering migrating over to those clouds in the future, but not a substantial investment there. But the real point of today's webinar and why we're focusing on Microsoft and Google is because these clouds should not be overlooked. There are many new services that are being developed over the years, and I'll get to in the next moment a few of the key services that are driving cloud spend. But if you are a multi-cloud user and you do have Azure and Google in your footprint, we highly encourage you to focus on them for cost efficiency as well, especially if you have plans to grow these clouds over time. And if Google and Azure are your primary clouds, then this webinar is definitely for you. And again, highly encourage you to start focusing on cost and usage efficiency. That brings us to the key services driving cloud spend. And this is not an all-inclusive list by any means, but just to make a point, there are the standard services that many organizations adopt, such as compute and storage, virtual machines, compute engine, blob storage, and cloud storage, respectively. And there are plenty of services not listed here, such as databases, networking services, and so on. These services that are highly adopted are always going to drive a significant amount of cloud spend. And then there are services that have evolved over the past few years that are considered big cost drivers as well. And a good example of that is with Kubernetes. We're now in the realm of having 10 years of Kubernetes, but when Kubernetes and containerized applications first came about, a lot of folks didn't necessarily know how to manage that spend and optimize their usage. Of course, we're now in the AI boom, and I know what you may be thinking. Oh no, here's another webinar about AI. I promise we're not going to harp on it too much. But recently, Microsoft and Google have released many new services in the realm of AI, and both of these organizations are really trying to establish themselves in the leader in that market. And AI is a significant driver behind Google's growth right now and why it is surfacing to the top as a formidable cloud choice. Now, whether you are already using AI or not, you may be experiencing unpredictable cloud costs, trouble with, aligning it to budgets, forecasting predictability, and ultimately operating efficiently in the cloud environments of your choice. And that's what brings us to this scenario here. Now, I know many of you have probably encountered this in your organizations, and it may not necessarily be a conversation between finance and engineering. Perhaps it's a conversation between someone in your executive team and someone in engineering, conversation between a line of business and engineering, many different scenarios in this model. But ultimately, there are many different stakeholders within an organization who care about cloud costs. Now, their focus on cloud spend may come from a different angle and a different approach to what your team is doing. But ultimately, we need to break down barriers and silos and help folks collaborate. And that's where FinOps comes in. FinOps is a collaborative practice for maximizing business value. And essentially, FinOps is the new cost management. And many of you may be familiar with cost management as a term, and maybe many of you may be familiar with FinOps. But for those of you who aren't, some key distinctions between cost management and FinOps are that cost management is often considered a more reactive and siloed approach. You have a budget mandate coming down from the top. Folks are asked to identify savings, and it's a pretty immediate need. FinOps, on the other hand, is a more proactive and collaborative approach. And the emphasis here is really on bringing multiple stakeholders from different departments to the table. Now, whether folks are in finance, procurement, product ownership, engineering, or even allied personas like sustainability and security teams, all of those teams have a stake in the game when it comes to your cloud spend. Now, a few key components of an essential FinOps practice that we found are first and foremost the people. So whether you are a team of one and you're the sole FinOps lead, or perhaps you're part of a larger FinOps team, it is essential to, identify those stakeholders in your organization who you can work with and partner with for FinOps. Now, for anyone on the call who happens to be a managed service provider, there is also an opportunity here for you to become the FinOps team for your customer, and you have the opportunity to build out FinOps services. Second is the process. And the FinOps Foundation, which is an independent third-party nonprofit, has established a FinOps framework, and thousands of practitioners across the world have contributed to this framework along with many vendors. And this is a really great framework for understanding best practices and how you can get started on your FinOps journey. Again, as a managed service provider, you have the opportunity here to align your services to different components of the FinOps framework. And the last piece here is technology. Inevitably, many organizations grow out of manual spreadsheets and tracking and decide to invest in some tooling. There are many different tooling options out there. There are niche platforms that hone in on a specific capability, such as Kubernetes management or commitment management. And then there are broader FinOps platforms that take a more holistic approach across the entire FinOps lifecycle. We recommend implementing a FinOps certified platform as defined by the FinOps Foundation. And Ternary is a great example of a multi-cloud FinOps platform that has broad capabilities across the entire FinOps lifecycle. Hayden will demonstrate that shortly in the platform demo. That brings us to a few ways to unlock cloud cost efficiency. Now, again, not an all-inclusive list by any means. And for the managed service providers listening in, you should be thinking about how you can take some of these best practices and build a service behind it. Whether that's considered a cost optimization service, a FinOps service, or you brand it as an efficiency service, there are a lot of opportunities there. But before we get into, these tips here, I do want to highlight, the most important foundational element is you can't manage what you can't see and what you can't understand. Bringing us to the first tip here is categorizing resources into business labels. Now, every organization may have a different idea of what groupings they need to view their data by, and that sometimes could be by application, a project, owner, teams, so on and so forth. And this is really key here as you expand your FinOps practice to include more stakeholders and more teams, because the way finance wants to slice and dice the data may be slightly different view than the way engineering wants to slice and dice the data, but you need to have a cohesive approach. Hayden will demonstrate this in the platform. The second tip here is eliminating zombie infrastructure. So those zombies, they are, resources that are sitting idle but incurring costs in your environment. And they're often considered low-hanging fruit or quick wins for being more efficient. Closely following zombie infrastructure is right-sizing opportunities. Now, depending on your organization and your governance policies, you may have accounted for extra headroom for certain resources or workloads, but there may be times where things are over-provisioned and not effectively utilized, and that's where right-sizing can come into play. Another best practice is to purchase and manage commitment-based discounts. Emphasis here on the and manage. All of the cloud providers offer, different pricing mechanisms and discount mechanisms that organizations can take advantage of. But if you don't closely monitor your utilization of those discounts, it's possible you're paying for something that is, again, wasteful. And these commitment-based discounts, they're not cheap. They can be a significant expense to your organization and may often require, finance and procurement involvement. And lastly, they say time is money, and it couldn't be more true when it comes to anomalies. Very important to detect and investigate anomalies quickly, especially for organizations who are starting to experiment with AI and new applications. You want to be able to understand if your spend is increasing drastically or there are any irregularities in order to combat that early on. Again, costs can balloon out of control, and we really want all of the organizations to have that control and focus on efficiency for their organization. And with that, I will hand things over to Hayden to walk through the demonstration.
Thank you for that, Marie, and I appreciate the overview here. I'm going to now take over the screen sharing. And as Marie had mentioned in the chat, if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A window, and then we can take any of the questions at the end of the webinar here. So jumping right into it, we're going to be going through those different categories that Marie had mentioned. So we're going to be starting at the ability to categorize resources into business labels, and then we're going to be looking at how we can start to eliminate zombie resources and then right size your resources, and then moving into the purchasing and managing commitment-based discounts, along with detecting and investigating anomalies. Now, as Marie was kind of talking about in the slides there, we do cater to both two types of users between not only just the direct customers, but also looking at the MSPs of the world. So we're going to be starting at this MSP dashboard and just doing a very brief overview here of some of the capabilities that are available as an MSP provider there, right? Or as a managed service provider. So just taking a look, the very first thing that we'll do is we're going to want to ingest any of that data that's coming in or pulling in any of the different accounts or customers that you may be working with. And by doing so, this is where we can start to actually understand and see kind of what's going on with respect to those different tenants or those customers that you're managing today. So we can take a look at things like, hey, what's my user cost or my build costs, or all the different or all the costs that are being incurred from all of those different customers that you have today, and even looking at things like your monthly trends down below, and seeing things like your delta or the percentage change that might be associated with those customers. You're able to drill down into those specific customers if you'd like, if there's anyone that in particular that you're looking for, or if you want to select it by maybe your billing account or maybe a specific provider, region, or service, you have the ability to start to drill into that data. It really just depends on how you want to into how you want to visualize that. Now, keeping in theme with the slides that Maria had shared, we can then start to take a look at some of the savings that are available within those different customers that you're working with. So we can see your different usage optimization. So this is going to be saying, hey, are we going to be looking at zombie resources or even right sizing those resources? And you can actually click the little drop down arrow and start to see where some of those different monthly savings could be capitalized on based on which specific tenant you're looking at, right? Or maybe you have a specific recommendation there for GKE or BigQuery, or maybe even GCS that we're making, and you can see some of those estimated monthly savings. And then on the right-hand side, this is where we're looking at some of those rate optimizations. So looking at those CUDs or those RIs or savings plans and what's available there. So you can see we have a fairly large amount of capitalization that we can, or a fairly large amount of discounts that we can capitalize on based on some of those different tenants that we're looking at. So we have a lot of GCP committed use discounts in our demo platform that we can take advantage of. And finally, when we're looking at this dashboard, we can see the different anomalies that we're seeing within our customers' data. And so this is going to be showing me all of the different data, all the different anomalies that are being spun up based on the data that we're pulling in from the cloud providers. So if we do see any specific anomaly that deviates from the norm, then we'll go ahead and alert you, and you can start to drill into that. And at a high level from the MSP dashboard, you'd be able to see, all the different anomalies that are being spun up in any of your different customers' data. At which point, then you can go drill down and figure out exactly why that's happening, or identify the root cause to really drill into kind of understanding why did we have that spike in data, and then share it with your customer. But this is just looking at it from the MSP point of view. Now, what we're going to be going into is the actual platform itself. And as an MSP, or even as a direct customer, when you come into the platform, the very first thing you'll see is a dashboard that you can then tailor and manipulate for yourself. So this is going to be a dashboard that I've created here called my Emerging Cloud Dashboard. And so we recently started a new application and a new venture into making sure that we're spinning up resources in Azure and GCP. And this is a dashboard that I've built to start to track some of those costs, and to be able to really drill into it and understand exactly what's going on with my data. So this is a text widget that I have in the top left corner that you may see here, that I can add it and add in additional details if I have to, but it's really something to help remind myself, or to kind of understand why I built this dashboard. And effectively, my FinOps team reviews this dashboard every month to understand exactly where the costs are spending and what our largest cost drivers are incurring. So this is one of those situations where I built this dashboard to really just get an understanding of what's going on within my Azure and GCP spend. So right now, I know that I am spending around $2 million over, or year to date in the last few months here, or I guess in the last 2 months. But now I understand exactly what my Azure, my net costs and my amortized costs are versus my GCP net costs and my amortized costs, right? So this is an easy at a glance way to understand and filter into that data, to really just drill in and understand exactly, oh, okay, well, I know that I've spent around X amount of dollars in the last 30 days, in just the last 30 days. And we can understand, are we trending in the right direction? Are we upspend, or are we down in that percentage? And in this case, we're actually down in our amortized cost and net cost for GCP. And then in our amortized cost for Azure, we're actually up. But if you're looking at it just from a net cost point of view, we're down a little bit, right? And in the left-hand side, you may see these 30-day realized and these savings widgets here. And this is effectively letting me know, hey, what savings opportunities are being captured in the platform. So this is a situation where I'm able to see that based on our right sizing recommendations and based on any commitments we're using today, I have around $54,000 worth of realized savings. And then if I were to look at all of the different CUDs or the committed use discounts and the RIs and savings plans that are available with between GCP and Azure, I have about $1.8 million worth of savings that I could capitalize on. That if I were to implement every single one of those different recommendations, I would have a much, much higher realized savings amount. But based on my current realized savings, we're looking at about $54,000 just over the last 30 days, which isn't too bad in the grand scheme of things, right? Now, once we start to ingest your data, the first thing that we like to do is start to map out any of your tags or labels that you're currently leveraging today. And by doing so, we can start to build out different reports or widgets or dashboards that are centered around those specific labels or tags. And when we look at some of the widgets that I have here, you can see my cost per cloud. So this is showing me that I do have a large amount of data or a large amount of costs in AWS. However, since this is tracking and understanding, hey, how much are we spending in both Azure and GCP? I wanted to make sure I could see where all my different clouds are and how much I'm spending in all those different clouds there. So we have about 30% in Azure and about 16/17% in GCP, with the rest being in AWS and a small portion in Snowflake and Oracle there, right? So once we've mapped in those tags, then I can actually start to build out some of these different widgets. So things like what are my costs by team? And by hovering over any of these graphs, I can see exactly what those teams are spending and what the costs are that are associated with those specific teams, right? And I can drill into any of this as well. So if I were to click onto that specific widget, it's going to drill into that specific team. So we can see the Pioneer team has a large spike in data on the 31st there. And more often than not, as most people are aware, during that time period at the end of the month, at the beginning of the month, it typically has to do with an RI or a savings plan or a committed use discount that we've purchased, right? So it's very easy for me to drill into any of that data, and I could click in that widget, which will take me specifically to that report that I used to create this specific widget. And just kind of scrolling down, this is allowing me to take a look at a couple of other things that I track internally here for myself. So looking at things like my application cost by environment, I now know how much I'm spending in each one of my applications and environments, and things like my top five most expensive resources month to date. So we are a large user of storage here. So you can see we're spending around $145,000 in storage. And our next largest, which is rather typical for most organizations, is around the compute engine there within GCP. On the flip side of that, we can see what our fastest growing categories are. So again, we know storage is a massive proponent for us, and so is the compute engine. So we can see that we have a large amount of spend kind of driving in our fastest growing categories, but we see things like our backups, our Cloud SQL databases, our App Engine and Virtual Network are the next five largest categories that are growing in that spend, specifically storage, compute, management, and databases, right? So it really just kind of gives me a quick understanding of what's going on. And then ultimately, where this is where I can build a specific report to really see who's driving those spend. And this is where what do my costs by team and application come into play. So based on the labels and the tags that we've created within the platform or the tags and labels you're leveraging today, we can build out reports based on that data. And this is where we're able to understand, hey, this specific individual that's tied to this application and product is tied to these specific environments and teams, and they're spending around $700,000 over the last 30 days. Or we know that VJ or Rashida they're spending around $269,000 and $256,000 over the last 30 days. And this is all built off of the label structure or tag structure that we're pulling in directly from your billing providers or your cloud providers, and then any virtual tags that we've created off of your data within Ternary itself, which allows us to really drill into that data. Now, the next topic we're going to be touching on here is going to be looking at how we can start to eliminate zombie resources. And I'm going to jump into my compute engine here, or my compute insights, where you can see all the different services we offer for specifically compute. And I'm going to be touching into the Google's compute engine here. So by clicking into Google Compute Engine, this is where we're going to start to be looking at the visibility section and understanding, hey, how much are we spending within CPU, network, disk, and memory? And that's how we're looking at and making our recommendations here. So we're pulling this in from Google Stack Driver for your utilization metrics. And by doing so, we can start to aggregate your costs by things like your category, your family, the operating system, the projects, the regions, the storage class, and storage type. And down below is where we actually understand what we're consuming today by the different families. So I can click this little view instances button here on the left-hand side. And what this will do is generate a report of all of the specific instances I'm consuming along with their utilization. So we know how much we're utilizing in those different instances, the resources IDs that are tied to them, and the actual instance and SKU and the cost that's tied to it from there. Now, when we're looking at this data, the next logical step is going to be, hey, how can we resource some, or how can we right size or eliminate some of that zombie resources? And that's where we'll hop into the optimization section here. And you can see we have quite a few different recommendation types. So we have a total of 373 recommendations. You can see what our month-to-date spend is, and we have about $18,000 worth of current recommendations. And we see some past recommendations there as well. Scrolling down a little bit, we can see that we have unattached storage volumes, we have some VM right sizing, we have zombie resources here. So I'm going to look at one of these zombie resources and kind of see exactly what's going on. And this is just switching off an unused compute instance. The amount of CPU being used by this compute instance is so close to zero that it most likely is not doing anything at all. So check if it's being accessed and if it's still useful to your applications, and remove it if it's not doing anything. And there's a couple different ways we can go about this, but one of the easiest ways is just using the change status and say, hey, is this inaccurate, implemented as designed, or is it accepted? And if it is, then make sure that let's change that status and send it to whoever's responsible. We can also snooze these recommendations as well. So maybe it is something that we need to take a look at in a month's time from now, or at the beginning of the month. So I can set that up, submit that, and then it'll pop back up then. We can create a case around this, which I'll touch on in a little bit when we hit the anomaly detection. But this will allow me to create a case, in which point I can link it to Jira. And by doing so, we'll be able to follow along and track that case specifically and assign it to whoever's responsible for making that change. And then we can also start to take a look at some of the other options that are available. So going past just looking at zombie resources, we start to look at things like unattached storage volumes. And very similar to looking at a zombie resource, it's a disk that's not attached to any instances, and you're being billed regardless of whether or not they're attached. So maybe you want to, and maybe they're not being deleted automatically. So we can start to delete these specific unattached storage volumes and start to capitalize on some of that low-hanging fruit and some of those savings there. Now, next thing we're going to be looking at is the right sizing of the resources. And I was looking at the Google Compute Engine here, but now we can go to something like the Azure Virtual Machines. Now, Azure Virtual Machines, very similar to the Google's Compute Engine. It is a similar screen here. The way we aggregate your costs, looking at things like your category, your family, your location or subscriptions, and looking at your data by CPU, memory, disk, and network. And also showing very similar down below the different families we're consuming here and what that usage amount that's tied to those instances. So this is showing a screen that very similar to the screen that we were looking at on the Google Compute side, where we can see, hey, what are we utilizing? How much is it costing us? And what are the different instances and families that are being consumed? Now, if I go into the optimizations here, then we are going to start to see different right sizing recommendations that we have specifically for Azure. And these are some of these recommendations. For instance, the second one here is going to say, hey, we have a specific CPU and memory utilization detected on this compute instance that's consistently lower than the total capacity of the compute instance. So maybe change the instance type to one that's better suited for this workload, and we might be able to start to capitalize on some of those savings. So our current SKU is a standard D8S V3, but by changing the SKU to a standard ES or E2S V3, we'd save around $384 here. And down below is how we're kind of getting to some of that, or how we're getting to some of those recommendations, or how we're getting to that thought process there. It also is going to show you your monthly carbon emissions and understanding the specific role name, the region ID, and then the duration of that specific instance. Again, we have the change type and the change status there. So you can say, hey, this is accepted as designed, implemented, inaccurate, or new. You can snooze this recommendation or create a case around it and assign it to somebody through Jira or just through Ternary's platform. Next thing we're going to be touching on is around the commitments and how we can start to purchase and manage commitment-based discounts. Going back to GCP here, we're going to be looking at our GCP commitments, and there's a couple things that we're going to see from this screen here. So we're going to see what our utilization is across our existing commitments and our estimated monthly savings. And then we're going to see some of the recommendations and estimated monthly savings based on the recommendations versus the total savings for that year, right? Or for the 3 years. And so as we kind of scroll down, we're going to start to see our existing inventory that we have today and what that looks like. So we can see things like our compute engine, we can see the family, the amount saved, the utilization. So we have a 99% utilization threshold on that specific CUD. And then the committed vCPU, the committed RAM. And then you might see this little orange caret on some of these. And this is effectively letting me know that some of my commitments might be expiring in the next 30 days or within the next 60 days or has expired within the last 30 days. So this is letting me know that one of my commitments are actually going to be expiring in the next 60 days. And if I click into this arrow, I can see, hey, view the commitments, and we'll see that we have one expiring on March the 1st there. This will also give me the full list and inventory of everything that I'm using. Down below, going past the existing commitments, is where we actually start to see the recommendations. So this is going to be saying, hey, there are some recommendations here. We can see the estimated monthly savings, assuming we're at 100% utilization, and our target coverage would be around $20 an hour. It's for specifically the Cloud SQL service, and if I click into the recommendation, it's saying it's a spend-based compute committed use discount for a 1-year term with a target coverage of $20 an hour for this specific account in the US Central 1. For some of these, it might be an optimal recommendation, and that's basically based on your historical usage patterns. We're going to be making that recommendation and saying, hey, this would be a more optimal recommendation for Cloud SQL based on what we've seen with your historical spend and based on what your usage patterns have looked like in the past. So you could either go full utilization or an optimal, and we make those different recommendations. And it's not just for specifically Cloud SQL, but we do it for a majority of the services that are available for both Azure and GCP. Now, going next to the Azure commitments, it's very similar to what we were just looking at with respect to GCP, in that we can see things like our total commitments, what our total cost, our recurring costs, and our utilization. And as I scroll down below, this is going to be showing my full inventory of everything that I have today. And based on the average utilization, the commitment, if there was upfront costs, and then if I scroll to the right, the expiration dates, the purchase dates, the term length, and then the actual commitment ID, and then that SKU name. So is it a compute savings plan? Is it an RI? The top 3 are savings plans. The rest are all RIs, as we can see there. It denotes this on the left-hand side. And in the interest of time, I won't necessarily show off all of the recommendations, but it is very similar to what we were looking at with Azure or with GCP, in that we'll make recommendations based on your historical spending patterns and show you, hey, maybe these are the ones that you want to purchase based on that. So last couple things here for you. We're going to be looking at the final bullet point in the slide here, and this is looking at detecting and investigating anomalies. So this is our anomaly detection here. This is automatically going to be running within the platform here. So as soon as we're ingesting your billing data, we're going to be using AI and machine learning to take a look at your historical spending patterns. And if we see any changes from the norm or we pick up on any anomalous spend, then we're automatically going to alert you. It is worth calling out, though, that you can create your own alert rules. So you could say, hey, I have about $1,000 or I want to track to see if we exceed $1,000 or $10,000 in a specific billing account or project or specific service or SKU. And then who do I need to subscribe to this? I can also set up the look back period. I can do it by percentage or minutely, hourly, or daily granularity. But automatically, we're just going to be taking a look at your historical spending patterns. And by clicking into this particular anomaly, if I look, we see it's a databases in the specific account that we're looking at, and it has about $4,100 worth of spend. I can identify the root cause here. So by clicking into this, it's actually going to pull in the exact anomaly we were looking at, and we can see where we had that spike in data. Now, seeing that it's at the beginning of the month, my guess is going to be that it's an RI of some sort. So what I could do is say, hey, let's throw in the line item type there. And by doing so, this is going to start to show me a little bit more information. And then if I throw in the SKU description here as well, we're going to really just drill down into that specific point and understand exactly what's going on there. So I'll click onto that. We see that it is an Aurora MySQL database with an RI fee there. But one thing I like to do is just add in all of my custom labels that I've created within Ternary and apply those here to really just help me understand exactly why or who spun up this specific reservation and why we hadn't talked about it yet. So looking at it, we can see it's an RI fee that's tied to the Apollo application in the Wizards team there, and it's part of the production environment. And Tal Leibovich is the person, the team leader that was responsible for spinning this up. So if I go back to the anomaly detection here, and I can take a look and I can create a case around that specific anomaly. So I'll say, hey, let's take that specific anomaly, create a case. I know it's an anomaly detected. It's a cost alert. I can investigate this anomaly and I can assign this to a specific individual. And then again, if you folks are leveraging Jira, then we can link this to Jira as well. So it's going to create a ticket automatically in your Jira pipeline so that you can start to go and investigate. And any updates that are made in the Jira ticket will reflect within Ternary and vice versa. So if you make an update in Ternary on that specific case, then it will reflect within Jira and you'll be able to start to manage it that way and start to hold that individual accountable and follow along with it. To give you an example of what this looks like, I've already created a specific case here around that anomaly that we saw. And I assigned this to my boss here and I said, hey, can you take a look? It looks like an RI fee, but I wasn't aware of any RIs being purchased in January. And then once I dug into it a little bit more, I realized that, this was related to Tal. I believe is purchasing an RI, see my findings below. And this was based on all of that data that I had created looking at that specific report. And then if anyone were to add a comment, if Mac were to add a comment to it, then you would see it pop up here and I would get an email alert. And then if it would also update and populate within the Jira ticket as well. And that is everything that I have for today's webinar. So I appreciate you folks hanging out and taking a look. I'm now going to stop my screen share and pass the mic back to Marie. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those in the chat now.
Thank you so much, Hayden, for that demonstration. And so as Hayden showed, those are just a few of the ways that you can get started unlocking cost efficiency with Azure and Google Cloud. As you get more advanced in your FinOps journey, there are different levers and mechanisms and capabilities that can be implemented as well, such as unit economics and really tying your cloud spend back to your key business metrics. But I want to wrap today with a few ways that make Ternary unique. There are numerous amount of FinOps tools in the market. Again, some are niche tools or point solutions that hone in on a certain capability area, and others are platforms. Ternary is a multi-cloud FinOps platform and has particular expertise when it comes to Google Cloud and Azure specifically. And a few things that are unique. First and foremost, flexible and agentless deployment. Ternary is available as a SaaS solution or a self-hosted platform. Very few tools in the space are available as a self-hosted option. Second, a modern architecture built for scale. The architecture of Ternary does run on Google Cloud. And if I'm not mistaken, we are the only vendor that runs on Google Cloud. So again, when it comes to Google Cloud and clouds like Azure, who are often considered, secondary clouds or overlooked in some fashion, we have prioritized those clouds and have a lot of expertise in that area. And to date, we manage more than 7.5 billion in annual cloud spend, and this is across, direct customers and enterprises, Hayden has mentioned, as well as managed service provider businesses as well. Easy to use for technical and business personas. I hope walking through the platform with Hayden, you're able to see how easy it is to create these different reports and visuals and customize the platform to identify key areas of opportunity and analysis. Although we did focus on Azure and Google Cloud today, you may have seen a few areas of the platform that refer to some of the other clouds we support. And we are proud to claim that we do have feature parity across the leading 3 cloud providers, Amazon, Azure, and Google. And we also have visibility for additional clouds such as Oracle and Alibaba. And lastly, as Hayden just touched on, case management for collaboration. And Ternary is really built at the intersection of finance and engineering teams and really hones in on the collaborative practice of FinOps. So it's great to have a platform that identifies, various insights, but how can you make that actionable? And case management is one great example of how Ternary can help you take action on the insights from the platform. And again, as Hayden mentioned, if you do have a Jira, we can do that bi-directional integration. And so if you're a finance practitioner and you see, an opportunity to save, but you perhaps don't know whether a machine can be right-sized or not, you can create that case, put it in the pathway of the engineer, and that engineer can pick it up in Jira and then decide whether or not to take action on that information. And the last thing I'll leave you all with, Google Cloud Next is coming up in April 9th. Hayden and I will both be there. We would love to connect with you all in person. And so if you will be attending, feel free to stop by our booth. And if you're interested in learning more about our participation and sponsorship of Google Next, you can visit ternary.app/next25 to learn more. And with that, we would like to thank you all for your time, and we'll hold on here for a few minutes to take any questions that folks may have.